Well, hello, people of the world. My name is Carpo, or Josh, and I would like to speak on behalf of nuclear energy. It's not to be controversial or to stir the pot with anyone who is opposed to nuclear energy, but rather to give my view on why I think nuclear energy is the cleanest source of energy that's available right now. And I know that that's controversial and that's an unpopular opinion. I realize this. And so, what's the word I'm looking for? I usually don't lose the words I'm looking for. It's not just to be counter or, because there are many people who really do believe that nuclear is the cleanest form of energy. And so, to give you a backstory real quick, and I promise it will be brief. When I was, and don't mind this, it's an Omicron virus floating around. Um, when I was younger, I got in trouble for marijuana, of all things. I ended up going to a restitution center. This was actually for not doing what I was supposed to do on probation. At any rate, I went to this restitution center for a few weeks, and I was pretty bored, so I looked on the shelf there, and they had a book about nuclear energy. And I don't recall what the book was, but I read the whole thing, and I was so fascinated. When I got home, I ended up reading a lot more about it, and I wanted to be informed on the topic if I talked about it. And I am informed on the topic, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how informed you are on nuclear energy, because people grew up fearing it. When I was younger, it's funny because we were at the tail end of the Cold War, right? In the 80s, we were like, still kind of like, whoa, nuclear weapons. And still at this point where the only reactors we knew were the standard, reactors that we know today in the US. A lot of folks don't realize in other countries they're building them by the dozens every year. But before I give my opinion on it, I should probably read this paper. And it just kind of lays out some of the facts, and you are welcome to dispute this. I'm not here to argue for the sake of argument. I am open to disputes to this, of course. But just a couple things I printed out on the net, and I'm not going to guarantee everything's 100% authentic. I'm going to do my best. Nuclear is a zero-emission clean energy source. Now, right off the bat, I realize that claim is bold because you still need transport, you still need facilities. It's not zero emission. But what they're talking about is the actual production of nuclear energy by lowering rods into water, producing steam. And a lot of people don't know that those smokestacks that you see at nuclear facilities, there are people who actually believe that's radioactive waste. No, it's not. It's just steam. And when it's running correctly, don't bring up Fukushima, because Fukushima is a different story and that can come up at a different time. It definitely should have been improved upon. It should have been built better and further back. At any rate, nuclear generates power through fission, which is the process of splitting uranium atoms to produce energy. The heat released by fission is used to create steam that spins a turbine to generate electricity without the harmful byproducts emitted by fossil fuels. According to the Nuclear Energy Institute, NEI, the United States avoided more than 476 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions in 2019. That's the equivalent of removing 100 million cars from the road, and more than all the other clean energy sources combined. It also keeps the air clean by removing thousands of tons of harmful air pollutants each year that would contribute to acid rain, smog, lung cancer, and cardiovascular disease. And when it comes to emissions, that's my number one concern, is actually the health of the citizens. Not as much global warming, any of the climate change issue. If you want to reach people who don't believe in climate change, for example, you can't talk about global warming or climate change. You have to talk about it in the sense of breathing in smog. That's how you reach people, what they can see. It says it also, okay, number 2, nuclear energy's land footprint is small. Despite producing massive amounts of carbon-free power, nuclear energy produces more electricity on less land than any other clean air source. A typical 1,000 megawatt nuclear facility in the U.S. needs a little more than 1 square mile to operate. NEI says wind farms require 360 times more land area. Now remember, this includes the building of them, the transmission cables. I'm not opposed to wind power where it works. If you look up wind power turbine blade recycling, you'll see where I'm coming from here. But this is the point. To produce the same amount of electricity in solar, photovoltaic plants require 75 times more space. To put that in perspective, you would need more than 3 million solar panels to produce the same amount of power as a typical commercial reactor, or more than 430 wind turbines. And nuclear energy produces minimal waste, and this is contrary to what I've always believed when I was younger. Nuclear fuel is extremely dense. It's about 1 million times greater than that of traditional energy sources, and because of this, the amount used in nuclear fuel is not as big as you might think. All of the used nuclear fuel produced by the U.S. nuclear energy industry over the last 60 years could fit on a football field at a depth of less than 10 yards. That is pretty damn small, I must say. And it says, and this is the part that I would point out if it didn't already say it, that waste can also be reprocessed and recycled, although the U.S. does not currently do this. However, some advanced reactor designs are being developed that could operate on that used fuel. And from what I understand, that would be the molten salt reactors, which basically don't melt down. If you have an issue with it, you leave the facility alone and it just stops the process. It's not like the fission reactors we're used to. And to give you a reason as to why we don't already do this, back in the 40s and 50s when we started on our nuclear escapade in the U.S., we wanted to produce as much as possible, as quickly as possible, but also be able to refine that further to make uranium. To do this, we had to have a certain type of reactor. The other reactors are the ones that can run on much milder forms of energy than using like refined uranium. But the war of nuclear weapons, for lack of a better term, the arms race led us to really take the wrong path with those reactors. And I think that we can rethink how we do things and perhaps start over again and talk about this as adults. And I'm telling you, the reason, when I grew up in the 80s, I heard the same stories about nuclear energy because nuclear weapons scared the shit out of people, okay? We've been at like 1 or 2 minutes to midnight on the nuclear clock for decades. I mean, it means nothing to people, but it's so simple. There are still missing nuclear weapons. It can happen at any time. It can trigger an international chaotic moment where we all make a big mistake. It almost happened several times in the past. I don't fear nuclear war. I think I fear the sun more than a nuclear war because I think people hopefully are smart enough to avoid this because no one wins, and we know this. It's game over for all of us. But when it comes to reactors, if we really allow ourselves to be divided over nuclear power at a time when we really should be not just finding cleaner sources of energy, but ones that also are consistent and productive. Yes, Fukushima was an utter disaster. Yes, 3 Mile Island was a problem. Yes, Chernobyl was an issue. But I've seen plenty of reasons why these were improperly implemented. But not only that Chernobyl itself is not as bad as you might think as far as what's coming back around it. If you go into the main facility, sure, you're going to get a lot of radioactivity. It is a problem when it's not handled correctly. We are smarter now. we know more about what we're doing now. I would like to say that I support solar or wind power 100%. I think that they're great for areas where they work. But nuclear is really, and I guess this is aimed at the people who claim to be environmentalists, the people who claim to be for stopping climate change or global warming. To me, I'm pretty neutral on the topic right now. I'll be honest. I'm not a climate change guy. I was for a while, and I looked at the data. And now I realize that human contribution overall, at this point, it's not going to change as much as I believe the IPCC claims. I don't think that we're ever going to be able to stop combustion engines, at least in the near future, and that there's a lot of doomsaying. We have bigger issues to worry about, like the first volcanic eruption or a solar flare that takes down the grid, which will just fuck everything up anyway. There's a lot of things to be concerned about, but energy is something we're going to consistently need. If we had a nuclear winter, for example, there'd be no sun for solar panels. If the wind changes patterns, we don't have wind. But nuclear is consistent throughout time. And that's coming from a dude who wears tie-dyes. I can't help it. From what I've read, my own information, I stand for nuclear power, and I'm in full support of it when done right. And I would urge people to do a little research on it instead of just instantly dismissing it because of past experiences with some of the older reactors. You think about what we've done with computers. We can go a long ways with protecting ourselves using different types of fuel. So, at any rate, that's what I got to say. I just had to get that out. And please leave your own comment down below if you dispute this and tell me why. If you look at the data first on how many people have died from carbon-based, like fossil fuels, how many people die annually that work in that field or from that cause, compared to nuclear, you'd be shocked. Nuclear is not even on the radar. A very small amount. Wind and solar also cause a lot of waste. There are nuclear, radioactive pits, literally, in China where they mine the rare earth elements for the magnets for those windmills. And also the solar panels. It's just hard to know what the right method is. Nuclear's proven itself. Thanks for listening.